Hello, this is Helen Dockrell from Notitia. In this video, we'll be talking through the continuation of a typical client process. At this stage, we're up to rollout priorities. So we've started transitioning over from ownership by our development team over to ownership of some of the processes by your internal team. And we've started defining roles and responsibilities. So that might involve complete ownership by your team. It might involve some roles to be owned by Notitia and some roles to be owned by your own team. Depends on your preferences and also capacity internally. At this point in the process, we typically find that there are two broad process categories being addressed. One will be what we would call a non-critical workflow. It's still essential to your business, but typically it's being viewed internally. And there are a couple of people internally who we can get involved who are willing to experience some changes and will be sort of less alarmed and less impacted by those changes to those workflows. So typically that might be an internal reporting process where that report is essential for the business. But let's say that's managed by 3 people on your team internally who can all be involved in this project to some extent so that they're aware that certain changes are going to happen to the system and they can take that in their stride. On the other side, there's the type of process that is very external facing or the equivalent of external facing. So you might have a true public facing interface that is live. You might also just have an internal system where you publish reports to your executives. Either way, there's very low tolerance for change in those systems, and any change has to be really well communicated and very much so in advance. The method of that communication is much more formal, and it would need to be very planned and very, very well known. What we would recommend is that we work on developing those internal facing processes first so that any changes to roles and responsibilities within your team that are going to happen are experienced earlier on in those internal processes, and people have time to kind of get up to speed and get comfortable with those roles and what those workflows look like. That then means that when we're planning the external version of those rollouts, your team is already on board and quite confident and can be very clear about what they can and can't do in terms of those roles and responsibilities, what they have capacity to do, what those timelines look like. So then the external rollout is a very polished process. So we're always aiming to start with those more internal, less critical workflows. That means that often what we'll try to do in terms of prioritizing development in those earlier stages of planning is to try to prioritize development that starts with an early rollout of any internal facing systems. And then allows your internal team in parallel to our development to start getting upskilled as we complete development. So we start with the internal systems and move on to the more external facing systems. That way there's sort of parallel upskilling. So in terms of timeline, you can have overlap there where you're getting internally confident whilst we're working on those external facing systems.